Magnus Carlsen became the world blitz champion thanks to this simple opening. It's called the Philidor defense. It starts with the move e4 and d6, and Magnus Carlsen played it against Fabiano Caruana himself. Now, a lot of people are gonna come to the comments now trying to be the smartest in the world and tell you that it's called the Pierce defense. They are wrong. In reality, it's not decided yet which opening it's going to be. Caruana plays d4 to grab the whole center, and Magnus answers with knight to f6, immediately attacking the pawn. Now, the most aggressive of you are gonna go, let's go ahead, play e5, destroy Magnus here, but it's unfortunately a huge mistake. You just take here, take there, after knight g4, white is busted, both pawns are under attack, there is no way to save it. But Caruana is a smart guy, I have played him myself, I know his strengths. He plays here knight to c3, which is defending the pawn and developing a new piece. And now is the deciding point. If you play g6 and develop your bishop this way, that's indeed the Pierce defense. However, if you play e5, and that's what Magnus played here, that's the Philidor defense. Caruana goes for knight to f3, trying to attack this pawn on e5. Now, once you're gonna play this opening, I want you to always keep an eye on that pawn on e5. This is the most important thing in this entire opening. Once you blunder it, the entire position collapses. Magnus is smart, he plays knights to d7 here, protecting that pawn. Bishop c4, attacking here, now knight to g5 seems to be a huge threat, and you might want to play h6. In fact, a lot of players play it. That's not that great. You want to focus on your development instead of moving your pawns. So bishop e7 is what Magnus played. Now with knight g5, you're just in time to castle and defend that pawn on f7. Remember, if he ever takes and exchanges 2 pieces for a rook, it's a disaster for white. Black is totally winning. Instead, Caruana plays castles here, castles from black, and white plays a4. Now, I'm pretty sure Magnus has watched quite a few of my videos. He saw this opening and like, oh my god, this is such a cool opening, let me play it to become the world champion. But he didn't buy my course. Yes, I have an entire course on this specific opening that teaches you all the possible lines you can play and white can play against you. And there I explain that whenever they play a4, you want to answer with a5 so that you control that pawn, it doesn't come forward. But because Magnus didn't buy it, he didn't know that. So he plays c6 instead, which is also a very important move in this opening, controlling all of those squares. But that allows a5. And Caruana goes forward and grabs the space on the queen side. Yet, even without my course, Carlsen is pretty decent chess player, so he goes queen to c7, very useful move here, defending the pawn on e5. Remember, the most important pawn in the opening, that far Magnus understands, and Caruana plays rook to e1, trying to continue the development, control that pawn even more, and yeah, just in general continue the development. Now h6, useful move covering here the g5 square. h3 and rook to e8. Well, you see here some tension is gonna happen in the center. And here is the key moment of the entire game. Caruana plays d5, which feels like a cool move, and a lot of your opponents are gonna play it in your own games. Once you try this fantastic opening, I guarantee your chess is gonna change forever. The point is, it's a bad move. There is a trick here that Magnus Carlsen takes advantage of. He plays b5, counter-attacking the bishop. And now, if you just go somewhere backwards, then we can go ahead with knight c5, the best square for this knight in this opening, and attacking the bishop. This is really great for black. So instead, Fabiano takes here on b6, en passant. Hopefully you know that rule. But now knight takes b6, attacking both the bishop and the pawn, making the position completely fine for black. In fact, in practice, it's even simpler to play as black. So Fabiano goes back, takes, and now this d5 pawn is rather a target, right? It's going to be a weakness, it's blocking all of the white pieces, and there is no weakness on d6 anymore because the d-file is blocked. But once again, Magnus Carlsen suffers from not taking advantage of my course because a5 was such a great move to make sure that rook is not that active anymore, and then you can play bishop d7 and maybe even continue with a4. Instead, Magnus plays bishop d7, allowing that rook to come to a6, and now no, a5 is not possible anymore. And in fact, Magnus struggles a bit because this pawn on a7 is going to be a weakness for a lot of next moves. Rook to c8, queen to g3, queen b7, rook a5, yeah, just pushing the rook away, but you still cannot play a5, you still struggle with this weakness. bishop to d8, and as a result, black is a little bit more passive. Yet the position is incredibly solid, and Magnus overtakes the initiative very fast here. The first things first, he exchanges the queens and then brings more pieces to the queen side. That's where the battle happens. That's where he wants to take advantage. So knight to c4, attacking both the bishop and the pawn. Basically, there is no way to avoid the exchange for white. And now black has a pair of bishops. The position is still a little bit better for white. Remember that a7 pawn, if it would be on a5, no problems for black. But now it's a weakness, and that's a concern. But pretty quickly, it goes back in Magnus's favor because he activates all of his pieces. Please remember it, you always want to use as many of your pieces in the game as possible. So he gives up the a-pawn. I don't care, he says, I just want to create a counterplay. You see, with every move, he goes forward and creates a new threat. That's the best strategy you can use in chess to outplay your opponents. You improve your position and you create threats against your opponents that are not that easy to deal with. Knight to a5, yeah, trying to go forwards, trying to be active from the Fabiano's side, but the problem is all of those pawns are now horribly weak. Magnus takes on b2. Moreover, now the knight is hanging. The pawn is hanging twice. It's completely going the wrong way for white. Knight to c6. Nevertheless, that knight is super active. That was the entire idea. And unfortunately, Magnus is in time trouble here. He has 14 seconds. The right move was bishop f6. Just look at how powerful that bishop is gonna be. Just one move away from playing e4, opening up that monster, potentially. One of the ideas. Like another one is just to take here, and those pieces, they are not feeling that great. Instead, I understand, I mean, that's a completely human desire to exchange some stuff, especially this bishop. It feels to be very strong from the white side, and you don't have any time, so you just want to exchange some stuff. That is what happens, and still, black is really feeling comfortable here. Taking on c2, attacking the knight, knight goes to b5. Now, something unreal happened. If you are tired of forgetting your openings and losing because of that, Chess Reps, the sponsor of today's video, is a perfect solution for you. Choose the opening you want to learn and train it in a fun and interactive way. You will get targeted puzzles and reels specifically for your opening, as well as modes like Arena and Leaderboard to see how you stack up against others. Check the link in the description to try it for free. Magnus Carlsen loses this game in just one move. He didn't buy my course, so he didn't know that once your opponent makes a move, you are supposed to think, what is the threat? What does he want to do? He's attacking the rook. Magnus Carlsen ignores that, plays bishop to d3, loses the rook and the game in just one move. On a serious note though, I think the problem was in his head, Carlsen already took the rook on a7, and afterwards he played bishop to d3. But he just forgot to make the move on the board, and that is why he completely forgot about this rook, bishop d3. And like, if you do that, black is doing so great. It's much better. Black is nearly winning here in terms of high-level game. But in the game, after bishop d3, the rook is lost, so is the game. So despite such a great opening, Magnus Carlsen has lost. But I have told you that he became the world champion thanks to this beautiful opening. How is that even possible? Well, that's because after this round, Magnus Carlsen began to overtake his opponents, winning one game after another, and got into the semifinals, beat the same Fabiano Caruana, got into the final where he played against Nodirbek up to Satorov, and he lost the first game as white. So here, he's playing black, he really needs to win that game. And guess what? He plays the Philidor defense. And oh my god, this time it worked. Nodirbek plays d4, so we have the same opening, knight f6, and instead of playing knight to c3 here, which was Fabiano's choice, Nodirbek plays bishop d3, which is not that active to be honest, but it's still of course a reasonable move. After e5, he takes. Now, a lot of your opponents are gonna take here on a5. That's a very natural thing, but it's wrong, because you basically exchange this more active pawn for this less active pawn. Moreover, you open up this diagonal, you free up this square on c5 for the knight, so it's always great for us when they take it. But on your level, like, the majority, the vast majority of people are going to take it. Afterwards, you never have any problems. In fact, I would argue this position is already a bit simpler to play as black. I mean, this bishop is like a huge pawn here. What's the point? Knight f3, knight to d7, bishop c5. Yeah, very convenient development for black. Castles, knight to c4, rook to e8. So you see the same ideas here with that rook, with that bishop, a3. And here, the first little inaccuracy happened. Magnus plays a5, which feels like a reasonable move, but in fact, it doesn't really stop the b4 idea altogether, because that would attack the bishop, and that's what Nodderbeck did with bishop d2. Instead, if Magnus would have played bishop to f8 back, prophylaxis, like you always think what the opponent wants to do, right? He plays a3, he wants to play b4, and you anticipate that. Magnus did that, but just a5 is not that great at stopping it, it still happened. Whereas here, if you play b4, then it's a very interesting position. I think Magnus would like it a lot because he has this c5 resource. You attack the pawn. White is not happy to take it back because knight takes c5, the knight is so great, the pawn on e4 is weak. I mean, this is a fantastic position for black. But if you play b5, then we go ahead and attack the pawn again. And yeah, as a result, we are getting a lot of activity. Again, not great for white. Finally, the best move for white is bishop to b2, activating a new piece and attack the e5 pawn again. But there is a beautiful resource, sacrificing the pawn temporarily here for black, with b5 and c4, and eventually this pawn is going to be taken back. But just look at that bishop. I think if Magnus would have shown this position, he would be happy to take it for black. Instead, he played the move a5, which stops b4 for a moment, but after bishop d2, and here it still happened. Not that bad, but you'll have to play bishop d6, which is like not an easy move to make. And Magnus doesn't play it. He plays bishop to f8. As a result, white gets the initiative. Still, it's very solid for black. We have a target to attack, so it's not bad. Rook e1. Eventually, Magnus understands bishop has to go to d6. That's where it belongs. Can be taken, yes, but then black has a very solid pawn structure. So instead, Nodderbeck takes on e5. That leads to massive exchanges in the center. A lot of people are going off the board. This b4 pawn is taken, and then queen goes to a7 and bishop e4. As a result, we get to this position. Takes and takes, queen and knight endgame. And obviously it's equal, but it's not a draw. Very important. That's how strong players are winning their games. Those pawns are not symmetrical, which gives slight chances to either side to like create some imbalance if you want to play for a win. Now what happened here is a quick queens exchange. Queen e5 takes. And most players would just agree to a draw. But Magnus Carlsen is not like that. I think that definitely means he has watched more of the videos on this channel. I talk so much about it, you have to create problems for the opponent. The position doesn't matter, the evaluation, yes, it can be equal all the time, but as long as you create those threats against your opponent, he struggles, and that's exactly what happened. So, in the endgame, three things matter. The king's activity, the passers, and the pieces activity. King is so special that I have a special category for it. It changes its role. In the opening and middle game, you have to be careful, especially when there are queens on the board. But in the end game, the king rises. It becomes a warrior that has to go forward. And most players under 2000 elo simply ignores that altogether. And that's what happened here. Magnus is marching with his king forward, and look how beautiful, how strong it is on d5 in the center of the board. He doesn't even care about this pawn on f7. Just goes forward. c4, he wants to create a passer. Remember, that's one of the three top factors. Once you create passers, then you have to push it forward, and that's super scary for the opponent. This pawn is not that important. It's not a passer, right? The f-pawn still cannot promote that easily. But black is having their contemplate there, and it's much more important. So instead, king to d2 happened, knight g4, they took both of the pawns, but still, you see the advantage here for black. The engine still doesn't care, right? It's equal anyway. And that is why it's so difficult to like learn the endgame with engine. No matter what, it seems like nothing happens. In a real practical game, though, black is putting a lot of pressure here. And that is what happens. G5, knight to G4, attacking the pawn again. Knight E4 was also good. And then knight to F6, B4, and finally knight E4. Just look at all of the pieces here. This king is much better than this one. This knight is much better than this one, much more active in the center, controlling so many squares. And the engine just doesn't understand that in a practical human play, black is in the driver's seat here. It's very difficult, especially of course in the blitz game, to handle all of the threats. Up to a certain point, Nodirbek was playing pretty well. But here, after G4 and knight to C4 check, you have to go somewhere with the king. Nodirbek played king to E2, which might feel natural, you want to keep your king close to all of the actions, but in fact it loses the game on the spot. Instead, you have to go to C1 or to D1 to keep control of this pawn. Remember, passers is the most important thing. And I assume Nodirbek has thought that in this case the king is too far away and Magnus would take advantage, but White is just in time to pick up all of those pawns, and then it's of course an easy draw. Really hard to understand those so fast when you just have a few seconds on your clock ticking. So he plays king to E2, and after king C3, the game is essentially over, because that passer is unstoppable. You have to give up the entire knight. And that is exactly what happened. Knight D4, knight B5, yeah, a lot of checks, but it doesn't change anything. Nodirbek decided, okay, let me sacrifice the knight for that pawn. Meanwhile, I'm gonna take all of those pawns with my king, and that would be a draw, of course. But Magnus did a very nice trick here. He is not playing knight f4, trying to catch that pawn, because there are h4 ideas, and then everything is going to be exchanged. Instead, he sacrifices that pawn to get to f3 with the knight. And even though White takes on h6, one pawn is eliminated, there is no way to get rid of this pawn. The knight controls both this square and the pawn. Even if you play king h5, still after h4 I can take it with the pawn and the pawn is gonna promote. That doesn't work. Otherwise, the king has to spend thousands of moves to get to the knight, and then it doesn't help. You still cannot take the pawn. Meanwhile, of course, Magnus is making sure that White has to sacrifice that knight. As a result, there is nothing you can do. Nice little trick here in the end. h4, you take with the pawn. You cannot take with the knight, as you lose everything. So pawn takes. And then if you play g5, it's just not fast enough. You take it and the pawn promotes. So instead, Nodirbek plays king to f4. And if you just try to go away, then it's not working. Then g5 is coming, the king is coming closer, and yeah, that's basically a draw. But there is this nice move, knight to g5, blocking the pawn. Remember, the passers, you always think about the passers. You want to push your passers, you want to stop your opponent from pushing his. And the point is, there is nothing you can do in this fight. If you take the knight, then you are creating a problem for your own pawn. You're blocking it, and in the meantime, this is going to be a queen in 2 moves. So black is easily winning. But if you don't take the knight, there is like nothing you can do. King f5 still doesn't help. If you try to go backwards, trying to control that pawn, well, this is a very nice structure where the knight is controlling the pawn, and so as well as blocking that pawn. And so the king just moves. Sooner or later, the king is there taking the pawn, and that is easy to win. So this victory, thanks to the Philidor defense, allows Magnus to even the score, and 2 games later, he is the world champ again. If you want to learn more about this amazing opening in this playlist, I show you all of the lines that your opponent at your level can play, as well as how you handle it and beat absolutely everyone under 2000 elo.